Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This is a campaign recap of our Dark Souls of Drakkenheim campaign. If you remember, when our story last left off, the characters were in the crypts under the chapel of Saint Brenna in the outer city. This was their second quest into the city, and they realized that there was the mummy of Saint Brenna down there in the crypts, unquiet in her undead state, and they were probably going to have to put her to rest properly before they could continue in their quest to retrieve the scepter of Saint Vitruvio. I do want to say, for the record, there's going to be spoilers for the puzzles in the Chapel of Saint Brenna in this episode of the campaign recap. So if you're planning to play through it at some point, you'll want to skip this recap so it won't be spoiled for you. So I'm not going to try to recap the entire previous adventure. I'll try to put a link up here that you can click on if you're not up to speed with where they are. But the important thing is our four adventurers, consisting of Nexel, the hag-born sorcerer, Talon, the tabaxi rogue, Pietor, the human drunken master monk, and Deus, the confused gnome druid, had discovered in this dungeon several sort of three unopenable doors. But they had discovered on the second floor there were these devices where you could spin this thing and it would winch the doors up out of the ground so that you could get past. So there's actually one of those doors right here. This is the actual tomb of Saint Brenna herself. And water has leaked in here and put out some of the ceremonial candles around her grave, and now she's walking around and misquoting scripture and mumbling to herself. They had closed this door so she couldn't get at them. But they had found the purification ritual that was supposed to be used to put all of these saints and paladins and clerics to rest, and they had deduced that in order to get past the next door, they were going to have to put her to rest properly, and she wasn't going to sit still for the whole thing, so they were going to have to fight her, beat her, and then put her remains through this ritual to put her to rest. So Pietor was upstairs with the immovable rod. I don't think they had figured out yet that it was an immovable rod. They only knew that it worked when it was in the socket of these turning devices. So the thing about a smart group of players like mine who've been playing 5e for a while, and most of them were playing before 5e was invented, you give them a chance to set up the battlefield for a fight like this, and they're gonna really be smart. And I appreciate that about my players. Now, they've been through a lot, and in the Dungeons of Drakkenheim, inside the city, you can't take a long rest. They'd already taken a short rest once, and they'd been in a few more fights than they wanted to. They'd used up quite a few spell slots. But Deus was able to cast spike growth, or whatever it is, along this whole corridor. So they knew when they opened the door, if they could kind of, come on girl, get her to come out, she would be taking damage, she would be at half movement as she came out, and then they would be able to pepper her with long-distance spells, which is exactly what they did. When Pietor turned the crank and opened the thing, she comes out, she immediately steps in the spike growth. Talon is technically hidden right here, so he's able to get a sneak attack on her with his psychic daggers and just did an ungodly amount of damage to her. And then Nexel threw a sacred blast of something at her, and even Deus got up here and sort of threw a magic stone at her or something. Old Pietor comes running down the steps. He doesn't have any range attack. There's nothing for him to do, so he's just kind of cheerleading the group, just kind of armchair quarterbacking, telling them they're doing a great job. Now, I had a lot of different monster books I could have drawn on to come up with some awesome stats for Saint Brenna's mummy, but I'm a little lazy. I've been a little busy. I had to buy a new car. So basically, I used a first edition trick. She was just a mummy straight out of the monster manual, except I gave her maximum hit points based on her hit dice and all that kind of stuff. So she started with 80-something hit points, I think. But other than that, she's just a regular, I think it's CR3 encounter. Well, she gets this far, and they're all just raining down damage on her. She was down to something like 20 hit points before she even had a chance to do anything. So she might be undead and confused, but she's not dumb enough to try to stumble towards them. So she retreated, and I did a little bit of rules lawyering here. I hate to do this kind of stuff as an old school DM, but we read every word of the description of the spell for spike growth, and it said you take damage when you move into or through the area, but she was moving out of the area, so I let her not take damage. She probably would have been down if she had taken that damage. So she hides back here and is kind of trying to catch her breath, and I was trying to see if there's some way she could heal herself or regenerate or something. There wasn't. They dropped the spell, and they come charging in to get her. Now, the fun thing about her is Deus changed into, I think it was a brown bear, and comes running up here, thinking he can finish her off, because I tell the characters when a bad guy is bloodied, which is a 4th edition thing where you're at half hit points. That's usually the only clue I give them about how much damage an enemy has taken, is when they're bloodied. So they had heard she was bloodied practically after Talon hit her with that sneak attack. So they were ready to finish her off and end this thing. But old Deus can't hurt her as a brown bear because she's immune to non-magical weapons. So, of course, the monk has fast movement. He gets in here, and they're all trying to team up on her. And this is when the party decided to start rolling garbage again. They had done so well in that round. They decided, we already did a whole bunch of damage against her. Let's start rolling garbage and see what happens. And they did. So the mummy punches literally above her weight class with her damage that she does. She does like 2d6 bludgeoning and 3d6 necrotic with every punch. Plus, you stand a chance of getting mummy rot, which is bad news. It's been bad news all the way back since 1st edition. So she punches and knocks out the monk for sure. And I don't think she could have gotten him. Maybe she got old Nexel down on the ground. And the player for Deus, I was rolling all this damage. He's like, I'm already down. I'm like, yeah, you still have to roll a saving throw. He's like, but I'm already down. I'm like, yeah, but you could get mummy rot, and it will be even worse for you. But as I say, I think they both saved against the mummy rot. So Deus decides to turn back into a gnome so he can start healing people. And I believe it might have been Talon who got the final shot against the mummy and took her down. So then the party, they get these two up, and they're kind of catching their breath, and they're talking about their plan. Pietro was going around lighting the candles, and they're cleaning her body, and then they're anointing her body with holy oils. These are all things that they saw in this sort of chapel pool room upstairs about what they're supposed to do. But what they don't know is that the evil power and the curse that's sort of over this chapel causes all of these undead to pop back up at full hit points after 10 minutes after being destroyed, no matter what. The only way to get them to actually stay down is to perform this ritual. So they're chitting and they're chatting and they're talking about what they're doing, and they're teasing each other about who's going to get healed first and all this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm mentally keeping track of, okay, when are we going to get to 10 minutes? So they finally did. They were they discovered another one of these doors over here, but they decided to focus on putting Saint Brenna to rest. And the last step, as described in the Dungeons of Drakkenheim book, is they have to all sing this hymn together. So I made my players literally sing Silent Night together. And I decided to do the dramatic thing as, sleep in heavenly peace. Like her hand starts moving a little bit and the 10 minutes is up. And she's like nobody sees it, but her one eye pops open and her hands start to move, and then they sleep in heavenly peace, and a light the lights brighten in there, and a breath of fresh air seems to come through the tomb, and they had put her to rest. So that was a fun little fight. But now the party had to buckle down and solve the puzzles in this dungeon. So here's the big spoiler for this dungeon. There are 2 of these rooms with cranks upstairs, but there are 4 of these doors that are more or less the same, except they have different inscriptions and stuff on them. Now, the secret of this puzzle is that each crank opens 2 doors. So the far away crank opens the front door over there, and then it opens this door. This crank, which is closer, opens this door, and it opens the back door on the other side. So the way it's set up, when you use one crank, you only will see that the front door is open in that half of the dungeon. You obviously can't see the back door unless you're already in the crypt. So my players were convinced that there are these hints on this door and the back door on the other side that have to do with light and shadow, and the true light of our faith guides us. This sort of riddle having to do with something about light and shadow and faith and all this stuff. And I started to get a little nervous as the dungeon master, because they were really focused on these riddles, thinking that solving the riddles somehow was the thing that they needed to open these back doors. They hadn't considered that the cranks could open more than one door, and who can blame them? And up here and on the other side, there are these other sort of plinths, slabs of stone with these other skeletons on them. And there's kind of a little bit of a puzzle revolving around them. So my players were starting to think, we definitely need to do something with these other skeletons, which also come to life if you touch them. We need to do something else with them to open these doors. So I'm sitting behind the screen. I don't know if any of you other DMs have ever done this, but I'm getting a little nervous. I'm wondering if, is there any way I can give them a hint or whatever? And I decided, you know what? When the front door on the other side opened, this would have come up, even though nobody was in here except the mummy. This would have come up and come back down. So Talon specifically said that he was searching this room. I think Pietro was out here searching this room. Talon told me he was searching this room. I gave him a search check, and I let him notice that it looked like the mud and dirt around this door had recently been disturbed by it opening and closing. Which it turns out that hint is actually in the book, and I kind of speed read the book as I'm trying to run the encounters. But that hint is in there. So he got that hint, and he was like, oh, when this door closes, this one must open. It must be like that. So Pietro goes back upstairs, gets back on this thing, and cranks close this door. And this door doesn't open because this door is tied to the front door on the other side, right? And so everybody down here is like, oh, well, that didn't work. Come on back down. We got to figure something else out. And the player for Pietro is like, I think I'm going to go open the other one while you guys are in there. And everybody else was like, nah, that's not going to do anything. That's not it. He's like, I'm sitting there with my fingers crossed. I'm like, please go do it. Please go do it, because that will get them out of this conundrum. So he decides on his own recognizance to go open the other one just to see what happens. And every time he's walking around in the dungeon, he's a drunken master, right? Every time he's walking around with the dungeon, I give him a evens or odds, which is where I ask the player to choose even or odds, and then I roll a die. And if it comes up what they guessed, they get whatever it is. I just pictured him walking along, flipping this thing around and being his regular semi-silly self, Jackie Chan self, and maybe he would push the button by accident and discover that it is in fact an immovable rod. He said odds, I rolled a 1, now he knows that it's an immovable rod. He figured out how it worked. But more importantly, he got to the other side, he cranked it open, and this door came open. Thank heavens. So now Pietro's here upstairs, and these 3 come into this room. And all that's in here is a great big pile of wood that is looks like it's ready for a pyre or a bonfire or something. And another one of these doors. This is a door they've already seen from the other side. This is the back door of the other crypt, right? And then there's this statue right here of Saint Vitruvio, and he's holding up this scepter, and the party is here for the scepter of Saint Vitruvio. That's the whole quest, right? So this is confession time for me as the DM. We're doing a series at my church, and we just talked about confession and how important it is. And so I need to confess here on the YouTubes, I completely failed my players as the dungeon master in this room. Pretty badly. It's pretty embarrassing. Basically, figuring out that so they try to move the scepter and it feels like it's magically held in place, or there's some kind of force pushing down on it. They can barely get it to budge. And so they're thinking about the 2 clues that they have that were on these 2 doors, right? They're thinking and thinking and thinking back and forth about these 2 clues. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, are they actually going to be able to solve this? I'm not going to give the solution on this episode because my players are still working on it. I know they listen to these. When we come back for the Dungeons of Dark Souls of Drakkenheim next time, I'll be able to spoil that. Oh, sorry, I got an email. But the way I failed my players is when they touch the scepter, it says right in the book that a sort of spectral voice can be heard in their head, and it gives a 3rd clue about how to move the scepter. So here I am, and we were getting close to the end of our time anyway. My party just cannot figure this out. So they actually go up the steps, they go around to the other side, they decide they've got to tamper with these other skeletons if they want to get this scepter to move. They obviously haven't done the last part of the puzzle, which is only because their DM obviously totally forgot to give them the last clue. So they went over to the other side and they started tampering with things, and all the candles go out and the skeletons come to life, and I'm like, all right, well, let's leave it on a cliffhanger. We'll play next time. And I got on the Facebook and I was like, did anybody else think that puzzle was a little bit on the hard side? And everybody was like, my players, as soon as they got that 3rd clue, they figured it out. And I was like, oh, I smacked my head so hard. So I had to confess to my players that I had totally messed up the 3rd clue in that room. So I said we were going to backtrack to that room when they got that 3rd clue the next time we played. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and give us a like, give us a subscribe if you want to see more of this content, and we'll catch you next time on the Henchman's Memoirs.